The story does not begin in a house, nor in a field, but by the river. The Carolina River moved like a serpent through the soil, dark and slow, its waters thick with silt and memory. Children were told not to linger near its banks after sundown. They whispered of chains rattling beneath the current, of a shadow that bent low in the reeds, shoulders hunched, dragging something no one could see. Some men, hardened with tobacco and whiskey, spat in the dirt and laughed at the tales. They said it was only the wind sighing through the cypress trees or the groan of branches leaning over the water. But when their laughter died, their eyes shifted, uneasy, toward the river's bend. For there are sounds that no man mistakes for wind. The scrape of iron links across stone, the muffled splash of weight pulled under. They did not speak his name, but the story belonged to one man, a man who had lived and suffered, who had bent his back under Carolina's sun until it bowed near breaking. A man whose silence was heavier than any sermon. His name was Silas, though in life, those who held the whip never called it. To them, he was boy, ox, shadow, anything but a man. Yet in the whispers carried by the river, his name remained, low and certain. The river was his confessional, his grave, his revenge, and his immortality. Even now, when a moon lies flat across the water, people say the chains stir again. Some claim to hear a low dragging sound on the banks, as if someone is still being hauled into the black current. Others say a figure rises, water pouring from his shoulders, clutching rusted links in his hands. But the old ones do not argue about shadows. They only say this: memory is heavier than stone. It does not drown. It does not rot. It drags, year after year, like a chain across mud. And Silas's memory lives where the river bends sharpest, where the reeds grow thick and the earth forever smells of storm. No cross marks the place, no scripture carved in wood, yet the air itself trembles with warning. Children hold their breath when they pass. Old men glance down and mutter half-prayers. Women keep their lanterns close to their windows when the night swells with thunder. They say chains are still rattling under that water, restless, never still. And though no one dares to stay past nightfall, all who live near the Carolina River know the same truth. The river remembers. It remembers Silas and the night he gave his master to the deep. In Carolina's fields, the cotton swayed like ghosts, white under the punishing sun. From a distance, the land looked gentle, rolling rows, soft blooms, the air humming with cicadas. But up close, the stalks cut skin like knives, and their roots drank more than water. They drank sweat, blood, and silence. Silas bent among them, his back arched under years of labor. His hands were hard as oak, split with old scars that never healed right. The overseer's whip had drawn rivers down his shoulders, and though the flesh closed, the marks never faded. They stitched across him like scripture no preacher ever read, cruel verses written by iron and lash. The master's voice carried across the rows like thunder, cruel, impatient, always hungry for more. He called Silas by no name, only boy, though Silas had lived more years than the man who ordered him. To the master, his worth was measured in bales, in how many rows he cleared before the horn called dusk. To Silas, each day was measured in breaths he had not yet lost. He had learned young that silence was survival. Words could be broken, twisted, used against you. Silence, though, it was a shield, and so he spoke little. He bore commands, bore lashes, bore the weight of chains that bit into his ankles, not only at night, but even in daylight, as if the master feared his shadow might run. The metal links left raw bruises around his skin, scars upon scars, until they felt less like iron and more like part of his body. But chains could not erase memory. When he bent over the rows, sweat dripping into the earth, he remembered things that others had forgotten. The sound of his mother's lullaby before she was taken, the rhythm of drums that once beat in the dark of a far camp, the smell of smoke from fires lit not to punish but to gather. These things lived inside him, though years of silence pressed them deeper into his chest. Others in the quarters saw him as stone, unshaken, wordless, immovable. Yet stone carries cracks. They did not see the nights he sat awake, tracing the scars on his arms like maps, each line a road that led to the same place. Nowhere. They did not hear the thoughts that whispered through him when the moon burned white above the fields, when even the crickets fell silent. The cotton itself seemed to mock him. It grew tall, soft, bright, the kind of beauty that sold for fortune in Charleston markets, and yet it tore at the hands that picked it. Its whiteness glowed under sun while his own skin blistered and blackened. He wondered often if the land was cursed, or if the curse was the men who claimed to own it. And though he carried no voice in the world, every scar upon him spoke. They told the story of chains not yet broken, but heavy enough to one day drag a man into the river. It happened on an evening when the sky bruised purple and the cicadas shrieked like broken fiddles. The day's labor was finished, the horn blown, and the men and women drifted back toward the quarters with their shadows dragging long behind them. Silas lingered by the fence, the chains at his ankles rattling like an old song that no one dared hum. That was when he saw her. The master's youngest daughter, no more than 8 years old, slipped out from behind the kitchen yard. She wore a pale dress smudged with dirt, her shoes too clean for the mud she trod. In her hand, she clutched a crust of bread, rough and half-eaten. She stopped at the fence, her eyes darting like a sparrow's, and set the bread down on the post. Then, without a word, she turned and fled back toward the safety of lamplight. Silas stood frozen. He had seen cruelty in every shape, but kindness. Kindness was a stranger in this land. He glanced around. The overseer was gone, the fields quiet. The bread lay waiting, simple as a stone, as though it had fallen out of the sky. Slowly, he reached for it, his fingers trembling despite their strength. He ate in silence. The crust was dry, rough on his tongue, but it filled the hollow that had ached in him since morning. He closed his eyes, and for a breath, he tasted something more than hunger. He tasted memory. The faintest echo of meals shared long ago, before chains, when voices laughed around firelight. It was not much, only a child's careless gift, perhaps not even kindness but curiosity. Yet to Silas, it was enough to wound him in another way. For kindness in such soil was doomed to wither. The next evening, she did it again. A smaller piece this time, left on the same post. Silas took it only when no one watched. He did not thank her, did not meet her eyes, but he knew she saw him. The nights that followed brought no bread, and perhaps she forgot, or perhaps her nurse caught her in the act. Still, for those 2 dusks, something shifted in him. He carried the memory like a spark cupped in his palms. But sparks cannot survive storms. Already he knew this. He had seen men whipped for less, for a glance, for a word, for nothing at all. A child's hand could not change a world built on chains and blood. Still, the act lived in him, and that was its danger. For when the lash came again, when the river swelled dark and wide, it would not be only pain Silas remembered. It would be the taste of bread, the impossible weight of kindness. That night, lying on the dirt floor of the quarters, he dreamt of the girl's small hand reaching across a chasm too wide to cross. He woke with tears burning his eyes, though no sound escaped him. Silence was still his shield, but inside that silence, something began to move. Something patient, something dangerous. The skies of Carolina know how to brood. By late summer, clouds swelled heavy and black, dragging shadows across the fields as though the heavens themselves were closing their fists. Thunder rolled low, not yet anger, but warning, a mutter that promised something greater to come. The air thickened, hard to breathe, and the cicadas fell silent, as if even they feared to call attention to themselves. In the quarters, whispers stirred. They always did when storms brewed, for storms made cover. Rain could wash away tracks, lightning could hide a fleeing figure. Some spoke of the river, wide and merciless, that cut through the land like a blade. A crossing, they said, might be possible if the storm raged long enough. A chance to vanish into the woods, to find a road north to follow stars. But whispers were dangerous things. They clung to walls, seeped under doors, and reached the wrong ears. The master's house stood lit on the hill like a beacon of judgment, and his ears were sharper than any hound. He ruled not with patience, but with suspicion, sniffing out rebellion in every sideways glance. And when suspicion found its mark, punishment struck with precision. One night, a boy no older than 15 was dragged back through the mud, wrists bound, body trembling from exhaustion. He had made it as far as the cypress grove before the dogs found him. The master ordered the chains tighter, so tight the iron bit deep into the boy's skin. For 3 days he was left without water, and on the 4th, the whip carved him open in front of them all. Another man, caught whispering plans near the fire, was lashed until his back peeled raw. His body hung on the post like a torn flag. The others were forced to watch, their silence demanded, their eyes warned not to linger too long on his suffering. And when the storm outside broke at last, lightning shattering the sky into jagged white bones, it seemed almost merciful compared to the cruelty of man. Silas watched it all. He said nothing. He had always said nothing. But inside him the storm grew. His silence was no longer only shield. It became vessel, filling, swelling, pressing against the walls of his chest until he thought it might split him open. The girl's forgotten bread still lived in memory, a fragile ghost. The scars on his body burned with every fresh punishment meted out before him. And the river, swollen with rain, whispered louder than the overseer's whip. On the 3rd night of storm, when the wind howled like an army of wolves and the rain struck the roof in hammer blows, Silas sat awake. The others slept fitfully, muttering in dreams, but he stared at the chains around his ankles. They did not feel only like prison anymore. They felt like prophecy. He lifted them once, testing their weight, the iron clinking like the toll of a distant bell. The storm outside rattled the shutters. The storm within rattled his soul. And together, they waited for what must come. It was not one lash that broke him, not one insult, nor one chain. It was the weight of years stacked stone upon stone, until even silence could no longer bear it. The storm had not ended. It howled through broken shutters, hissed through cracks in the walls, poured down the chimney in long sighs of wet wind. Lightning flashed like the sky was being torn open, and thunder rolled heavy enough to shake the ground beneath the quarters. The others lay restless, shifting in sleep, but Silas sat awake on the dirt floor, his back against the wall, staring at the chain that tethered him. He lifted it in his hand, let the links run across his calloused palm. Each piece of iron had its memory. Nights he'd been shackled to a post, mornings he'd been marched in rows, afternoons when a master's hounds had snarled at his heels. The metal hummed when he pulled it taut, like a voice speaking in a tongue older than Carolina itself. It told him what he had tried not to hear for years, that chains were not only prison, they were also weight, and weight, in the right hands, could become a weapon. The thought sat heavy, dangerous, but he did not push it away. He had lived too long bowed, too long carrying scars as though they were only marks of survival. The scars spoke louder than his silence now. They told him that men like the master did not stop. They did not soften. They only grew more cruel, more greedy, more godlike in their own eyes, until the land itself swallowed them. And maybe the land was ready. Maybe the storm was not only weather, but judgment. Silas closed his eyes and saw the boy whipped until his skin peeled. He saw the girl's fragile hand setting bread on a post. He saw himself, years from now, bent and broken, still dragging cotton sacks across endless rows, his body more scar than flesh. And in that vision, something inside him twisted until it could twist no more. He stood slowly, the chain clinking as he rose. Around him, the others stirred but did not wake. Their dreams were their own. His was something darker, sharper. He wrapped the iron around his hands, feeling the bite of cold metal in his skin, testing its pull. The links coiled like a serpent, heavy, patient. For the first time, he did not feel bound. He felt armed. The storm wailed against the world outside, and Silas listened to it like a hymn. Its fury was his own, its endless hammering his heartbeat. He knew then that he would not die bowed. If the river demanded a sacrifice, it would not be his body that fed it. It would be another's. In the blackness, thunder cracked like a drumbeat of war, and Silas whispered his first words in weeks. Not a prayer, not a plea, but a vow. No one heard it but the storm, and the storm listened. The storm raged into its blackest hour. Rain fell in sheets, so thick the world seemed to dissolve into water, sky, and earth indistinguishable. The river, swollen beyond its banks, foamed and snarled like some ancient beast freed from its cage. Trees bent under the wind, their roots clawing at mud, while lightning revealed the land in sudden violent flashes. The quarters, the fields, the house upon the hill. Inside that house, the master drank. His boots lay abandoned by the hearth, his shirt clung to his skin with sweat and whiskey. He cursed the storm as though it dared to mock him, cursed the servants for being slow, cursed even his own blood for failing to bring him peace. His voice rolled through the halls like rot, heavy and foul. He believed himself safe, untouchable, even as the world outside roared against his windows. But chains moved quietly in the dark. Silas stepped through the door like a shadow torn from the storm. His bare feet made no sound against the wood, the iron links coiled around his wrists glistening with rain. His face was stone, unreadable, carved by years of silence. Only his eyes burned, lit by the storm's fury. The master turned bleary at the sudden gust of cold air. For a moment, disbelief held him. Then his mouth twisted into rage. He reached for the pistol by his chair, but the chain struck first, a hiss through the air, a crack against bone. The gun clattered useless to the floor. The struggle was brief, brutal. The master swung fists, shouted threats, called on God himself, but Silas did not falter. He wrapped the chain once, twice, around the man's throat, dragged him from his chair with a force born not of muscle alone, but of years, of silence, of every scar carved into his back. The master kicked, clawed, spat curses, but the storm drowned his cries. Dragging, dragging, through the hall, past the boots by the hearth, across the porch where rain hammered like nails. The mud sucked at their feet, the wind tore at their clothes, but still Silas pulled, the chain biting deeper into flesh. The master thrashed, but he was only a man, and Silas was something more now. Stone come alive, silence given form, vengeance wearing the weight of iron. The river waited, wide and swollen, its black waters surging hungrily. Lightning split the sky as Silas hauled his burden to the bank. The master found breath enough for one last scream, a howl of rage and fear that vanished into the storm. Then the water took him. The river closed over them both, the master thrashing, choking, swallowed whole. The chains pulled, heavier than flesh, dragging him down into the depths. Silas held fast, pressing the weight until bubbles rose and burst on the surface, until the river gave nothing back. Only silence, only darkness. When it was done, the water smoothed as though nothing had passed. The storm raged on, but beneath the current, the chains had found their grave. By dawn, the storm had passed. The sky hung pale and washed out, the clouds pulled thin like worn cloth. But the river still ran swollen, dark and restless, carrying branches and debris along its current, as though the land itself wished to forget the violence of the night. Mist clung to its surface, soft as shrouds laid upon the water. At the plantation house, silence pressed heavy. The chairs were in their places, the boots stood by the hearth, but the master's voice, sharp as a whip crack, loud as thunder, did not rise with the morning. His cup of whiskey sat half drunk, rainwater dripping through the hole in the porch roof where the door had slammed too hard. The servants moved carefully, eyes lowered, as though a ghost might step from any shadow. At breakfast, the mistress sat stiff at the head of the table. Her hands trembled against her fork, though she forced them still. The children looked around in confusion. The youngest daughter, the one with sparrow-quick eyes, asked where her father had gone. No one answered her. The overseer muttered something about the river, about the storm, about accidents that come to men who drink too much. But his words carried no conviction, and his eyes would not meet hers. In the quarters, no one spoke of the night. Yet every eye flickered with the knowledge of it. They had heard something between the thunder and the rain, the muffled cry, the dragging sound across the earth. They had woken to an absence, and absence is a louder thing than presence. Some dared to glance at Silas, but he gave them nothing. His face remained stone, his silence deeper than ever. He had returned from the storm soaked to the bone, his body trembling, but his eyes empty as the grave. The day stretched long and brittle. Riders went out to search along the riverbank. Some came back with soaked boots, shaking their heads. Others claimed they found nothing. The master's name was spoken in low tones, as though the very air might carry it to ears unwelcoming. By sundown, his chair was still empty, and the mistress's knuckles were white from gripping her prayer book too tightly. And though explanations were crafted, accidents, drunken missteps, a body swept away by the swollen river, none of them settled. The storm had been fierce, yes, but storms did not drag men screaming into black water. Storms did not leave chain-shaped bruises upon the earth where mud had been torn. Whispers began, curling like smoke. Some said the river had risen to take its due, angry for years of blood spilled into its soil. Others said a shadow had walked that night, carrying chains in his hands, a shadow that wore the face of silence. The land seemed to hold its breath, waiting, not for the master's return, for no one truly expected that, but for what his absence meant and what it might awaken. They say the river never gave him back. Weeks passed, and no body was found. Riders scoured the muddy banks. Dogs were set loose on the fields. Prayers rose from the chapel with trembling hands. But the master was gone, swallowed whole. The story, like the storm, became part of the land. The mistress wore black for months, then years, but her mourning was less grief than fear. She never sat by the river again. She never let the children wander past the cotton rows after dusk. For in the hush of evening, when the cicadas died down and the mist began to rise, she swore she heard it. The dragging rattle of chains across stone, the sound of something heavy being pulled into black water. In the quarters, no one dared speak Silas's name aloud. Yet they felt it linger, whispered in the wind through the cypress trees, carried on the creak of the night air. Children grew up with the tale, half told by mothers who hushed themselves mid-sentence. Be quiet, or Silas will come, some warned. Be strong, as Silas was. Others murmured with pride they dared not show in daylight. The name was curse and blessing both, depending on who shaped it. By lantern light, overseers muttered of shadows near the river, a tall figure standing still against the rush of water, watching, waiting. They claimed to hear him breathing, the chain links clinking softly as though dragged along the ground. Some swore they saw the master himself, pale-faced and dripping, being pulled once more beneath the current whenever the storm winds rose. But it was the silence that endured. Silas, who had spoken little in life, spoke even less in legend. His vengeance was not a shout, but a hush that swallowed whole the roar of his oppressor. And so the fields grew quiet in the years after, every rustle of cane and ripple of water haunted by what had been done in that storm. Some nights, travelers passing through Carolina would hear the story around firelight, told in low voices. They would be warned not to linger near the river after midnight, for the water remembers. They would hear of the slave who dragged his master into the flood, his chains rattling with every step. They would hear that when the moon is thin, the current turns black, and a shadow rises from its depths, dragging, always dragging, never free. The tale never ends neatly. It was not meant to. For some, Silas is a specter of terror, a warning of rebellion too grim to name. For others, he is justice made flesh, the chain-bearer who broke silence at last. But to all who walk the banks of the Carolina River, his legend endures. And when the night is stillest, when you think yourself alone, lean close to the water's edge and listen. You will hear it, the storm, the scream, the rattle of chains, and then silence, the kind of silence that never leaves.